The next topic that we're going to dive into is something that is more geared to large data center deployments that you're going to have 2 or more data centers that you're going to want to deploy NSX over and want to integrate the connectivity between the data centers. They could be in the same building, they could be in the same campus, different buildings, so on and so forth, or they could be in different geographic areas. The big thing to keep in mind here is that we're talking about cross vCenter communication. So far, the cross communication that we've had so far has been we've added a second vCenter and used enhanced linked mode and single sign-on to integrate 2 different vCenter instances together. That's why we see, if we come over here to hosting clusters real quick, that's why we see this, right? That's why we see what we see right here. DC1 VCSA1, DC2 VCSA1, right? This is why we see what we see. Now, if I was to take and want to, glue these 2 together, I could. And the way you would do that is what they refer to as universal connectivity. So if we go back over here to networking and security, you're going to see that in the NSX managers here we have 10.00.21 and 10.00.31 right there, but they're standalones. We're going to flip that over, but before I do that, let me kind of give you an idea of what I mean by what we're talking about. Let me go ahead and do just a little bit of whiteboarding here. We're going to focus on getting the initial bits deployed in this video. We're going to take a look at some follow-on stuff like universal logical switches, universal distributed logical routers, and then integrating the connectivity with other connections and providing the connectivity outside and things like that. So right now we have our ESG1, we have a DLR, and then we have some logical switches hanging off of this guy. Like that, there's a transit connection between these 2. Then we have the CSR connected up here. Then down we have another ESG, and then we have a logical switch, right? This is our topology. Pretty simple stuff. It may not look simple, but it really is when you break it down. So I've eliminated the layer 2 VPN, I've eliminated the IPsec VPN, they're no longer in play. I went ahead and deleted all that stuff and rolled it back to where we were before. So this, if we were to go back 3 or 4 videos to, 3 videos before I did the IPsec VPN deployment. In this point, we need to be able to connect these guys together. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to distribute a logical switch that goes across. This is going to be a universal logical switch, and the universal logical switch is tied to a universal transport zone. You can only have one of these in your deployment when you're talking universal wide, because it's going to encompass as many vCenter servers as you want to attach it to. The whole idea of this is you are going to come up here and you're going to map. The standalone will be converted over to primary, and then you're also going to have a secondary, and I'll talk about how that works here in just a minute. We'll actually walk through the steps. But you can have as many of these guys, you can have multiple secondaries, and so on and so forth, and get all that stuff squared away. You can only have one universal transport zone, but you can associate multiple, 1 or more, let's do this, 1 or more logical switches to a single universal transport zone. You can have, when it comes to global transport zones, which we've already talked about throughout this entire series, when we mapped it to the compute cluster, and then we created a transport zone that covered DC1 and one that covered DC2, etc., etc. You can have 1 or more global transport zones, right? The idea here is the global transport zones are limited to a single vCenter deployment. So it's basically a one-to-one mapping. So you can't have a global transport zone spanning multiple vCenters. This does not work. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this guy right here, .21, to be a primary NSX controller, and then .31 we're going to convert him to be a secondary NSX controller, or I should say manager. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set up the Universal Transport Zone. We're going to set up some specific, we're going to do the VXLAN connectivity for that as well. Make sure we get something connected here. And the idea will be that the DLR that we have at this site will go away. Well, we won't get rid of it. It'll still be there, but it'll be only for local traffic, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of logical switches that are going to span both vCenter deployments. And we're going to create a UDLR that's going to provide the connectivity for the universal logical switches. And then UDLR will connect into both Edge Services gateways to provide connectivity outside of the environment. And we're going to test all that stuff out. Now, part of my direction with what I'm going for here is the VMware Certified Implementation Expert for Network Virtualization currently is in the version of 6.2, which means it's still on NSX for vSphere. It hasn't been converted over to NSX-T yet. So there's going to be a handful of things we're going to take a look at when it comes to the universal capability. So there's going to be, we'll take a look at the distributed firewall and some other stuff that goes along with universal connectivity. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. We're going to walk through this config. It'll make a little bit more sense once we start getting everything up and running and deployed. So from a dashboard perspective, we're going to come over here to installation and upgrade. I'm going to come down here to my NSX managers. As you can see, I have both of them here. I'm going to click on this guy right here. I'm going to select it, go to actions, and assign the primary role. It says, you want to assign it? Yes, I do. Click yes. It's going to take a couple seconds, and then it'll go from a role of standalone to a role of primary. Perfect. Now, once this guy has flipped over, okay, so I refreshed the screen and it popped up. Now, if I click on this guy and click on actions, interesting. Well, in order to associate a second NSX Manager as a secondary, you need to click on the primary, actions, and then say add secondary manager. And then that's going to do that. So we're going to say NSX Manager that you want to associate to, which is going to be 10.00.31. And the username is going to be the admin at, we're going to go ahead and plug in the vCenter config and then come down here and issue the password that we deployed with. This should be your single sign-on for vCenter. Click on add, and if I've done everything correctly, we do get a thumbprint. We're going to go ahead and accept the thumbprint, and then that will associate DC2 NSX Manager 1 as a secondary manager. And it says add secondary manager, failed reason, NSX replicator already has controllers installed, cannot add it as a secondary. Okay, so I need to go, so basically what it's telling me is this guy right here on the secondary node, the standalone, I need to get rid of this. So I'm going to go ahead and, because it's going to automatically add a new one, I'm going to go ahead and just delete this guy. And I'm going to force delete the connection, and that will get rid of the NSX controller. Let's go ahead and refresh. There, it's gone. I'm going to go back to NSX managers, click on this guy, actions, add secondary manager, and we're going to do that one more time and associate the password. Click on add. We're going to accept the thumbprint, and now what it's going to go do is it's going to join them together, and then the NSX controller here will actually be replicated. We're going to have a secondary one show up, and we'll see it here on the secondary here as well. So we're going to patiently wait for it to, there it goes, it's connected, and you're going to see on the primary, you're going to see it on the secondary, you'll see both of them show up. Go ahead and refresh. There we go. So even on the secondary, we can see that the secondary NSX controller node, we actually is using the primary. So we've got that going for us. So the first two major steps are done. Just to recap what we did, we went through and we gave DC1 NSX Manager 1 the primary role, and then we associated DC2 NSX Manager 1 as a secondary. By doing that, it automatically replicates the first data center, the primary, it automatically replicates the NSX controller node, and it just recreates one for the secondary deployment. So we're good to go there. Now I'm going to go ahead and you notice that it's managed by 10.00.21. All right, so if I go to host preparation, nothing that I have to do here. If I look at my primary, we can see everything that's rolled out here. We're in good shape. We actually get to go to logical network settings, and then we have to do a little bit of additional config. Notice that down here we have universal segment ID pool. We had segment ID pool here for the primary, and then we look at the secondary, we can see we're 6,000 through 6,099. I'm going to go back to primary, and what I need to do is I need to edit the segment ID. So I'm going to come in here and edit, and I'm going to give this a different range. So in the segment ID range here, for the universal, I'm going to give it a range of 10,000 through 10,099. And that's going to give me up to 100 logical switches in the universal segment. So I'm going to click on save, and there we go. Now the transport zones. This is where it gets a little interesting. Now I have to go and create a new transport zone, and the transport zone is not going to be a scope of global, it's going to be a scope of, you guessed it, universal. I'm going to go ahead and click on add, and I'm going to give this guy the universal transport zone. And one thing that you have to do with this is click the universal synchronization, and then you associate the clusters that this is going to associate to. No different than creating a data center wide transport zone like we did for DC1, so that we can have our DLR and our ESG. The DLR sits on the compute cluster, the ESG sits on the management cluster, and then we use a data center wide transport zone that's got both management and compute added to it. I'm going to simply check the box here and click on add. Now that adds it. Now if I want to go to this guy and I want to say connect clusters, I've already added them. In order to add the second NSX Manager, I need to come down here and click on secondary, and then I can come to here on the universal transport zone. Notice it's universal, connect clusters, and I'm going to choose DC2 compute cluster because that's all we have deployed. Click on that, and we're good to go. That is the basics to the operations in terms of what we need to do. Up to this point, we have taken we've converted our NSX managers to primary and secondary. We went ahead and replicated a controller node. That's been done. We went ahead and we added a universal transport zone. We added our clusters to it, and we also added some segment IDs. So as transport zones, logical switches are created and associated to the universal logical switches, they'll be good to go. Now the cool thing about the universal logical switches that we're going to be taking a look at is they will span both vCenter servers. So I can go and associate a VM in DC1 and a VM in DC2, and they'll be able to communicate over that logical switch because it's universal. So I'm going to do that in the upcoming video. I'm only 15 minutes in, but I really want to focus on the individual pieces as we're going along. This would be the setup and stuff like that. We'll take a look at logical switches in the next video. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll catch all of you in the next video.